Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sublime Madness podcast. Today I'm starting a mini series on the book called War is a Racket, written by Smedley Butler, a famous World War I general. He was involved in our government's overthrowing of multiple different leaders in South America through the late 1800s into the early 1900s. That history alone could be its own separate video, which it might be eventually. But for now, we're going to talk about his book, War is a Racket, starting with chapter one. Who profits? And so, just like the title says, Smedley Butler goes into the different companies that made boatloads of money and he starts with Bethlehem Steel, which pre-war was making $6 million yearly, and during the war years it went up to $49 million a year. Obviously a big increase in wealth. Same thing with the steel industry. Before the war, they were making about $105 million a year, and then during the war, they were making $240 million per year from 1914 to 1918. And I mean, you can kind of just go down the list. Same thing with International Nickel Company, went from making $4 million a year before the war to up to 73 million a year until the war's end in 1918. And so along with all these profits came a lot of waste too, because sure, the government was paying these companies for steel or for whatever it may be, but that doesn't mean that the US actually ended up using that steel or using whatever that may be. And one of those things specifically was service shoes, which a lot of soldiers during the war complained they didn't see a lot of these service shoes, even though over 35 million pairs of them were ordered. Even Smedley states that his own personal regiment only got one pair of boots per person, even though with the amount of boots that the government paid for and ordered, each soldier should have at least two or three pairs a piece. So a lot of that money just went to overpaying government contractors, something that unfortunately has only gotten worse and worse with time. But Smedley gives you a little insight into how it works, even though the example is a little dated. Obviously, the waste is much larger today and it's on much more complicated things, not just shoes. One example I can think of from a few years ago, I want to say, I think someone from the Department of Defense was being talked to by Congress, and a congressman was asking the Department of Defense representative why this bag of bolts that he was holding that should cost at most a few $100s, why the government contractor who was providing them was charging, I think it was something like 50 grand for this bag of bolts. And that's on the small end. So you can only imagine if they're doing that for a bag of bolts. I mean, what are they doing for the F-35 or a secret government project that we have no idea about that they're spending who knows how much money on? I mean, the F-35, from what I remember, they spent something like $2 trillion plus developing it, researching it, all that sort of stuff. And that's a project that we know about. So I mean, I think the American people would be shocked and a little worried if they realized how much money we're wasting on these projects. And we're not even at war anymore. At least during World War One, there was an excuse to spend the money. Like, yes, there was a big war going on. We couldn't let Germany win the war. We needed to spend this money so that we could stop them. We don't really have those justifications anymore, and we haven't really had those since the fall of the Soviet Union. And the Cold War is kind of trying to be brought back with Russia and China both getting into more adversarial positions with us around the world. The Ukraine war still going on. Doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. Nobody really wants to negotiate, especially not Putin, because, I mean, why would he? He's winning the war. It's taken a long time. A lot of people are dying, but hey, his goals are still, eventually, they're going to be achieved. I don't like that they are, but unless we come to the table and negotiate, or unless we send in the entire U.S. military and NATO and start World War III, I don't see a solution to that. But yeah, back to the book. Along with shoes, another big thing that gets was wasted was saddles. The government purchased hundreds of thousands of saddles for the U.S. cavalry when, I don't know if anybody remembers World War One. Cavalry was not really used very much, and when it was not used successfully. Military commanders, generals at the time, they realized that cavalry was very obsolete. I mean, the machine gun alone. I mean, if you're on a horse and you're riding even with a giant formation of other guys on horses, and there's a guy with a machine gun, he's going to mow down the majority of you before you even get close to him. And so military commanders learned pretty pretty quickly that cavalry was not going to make a decisive difference anymore until cavalry became tanks towards the end of the war. But even then, they were definitely in their infancy, and they weren't ready for large scale combat yet. But yeah, so the American government paid for hundreds of thousands of saddles that never got used. And those are two of just some of the most basic wastes that happened. There was also 20 million mosquito nests purchased by the U.S. government that were never needed in the climate that the troops were fighting in. Sure, there were other infestations like rats and stuff like that, but mosquitoes were not native to France, especially the area of France that they were fighting in. So just another bit of waste, just so some government contractors could make some money, essentially. And so another thing that was wasted was money spent on airplanes. Over $1 billion was spent on building airplanes that did not see the battlefields of France. And that $1 billion today is over $30 billion. And some of that is probably necessary spending because obviously those are very early airplanes and people wanted to develop the technology. So I think some of that was actually good that we were tinkering around with that sort of stuff. But it sounds like a lot of it was just wasted on excess planes that never got used. And I'm sure there was really not much use for them. Because, I mean, by the time there was another war, World War II, by that time, all those planes that they built for World War I were horribly obsolete. So I don't think they really got much use out of them at all. And then along with the airplanes, there's the shipbuilding industry, where the U.S. government wasted $3 billion on ships, and almost $700 million of that was spent on wooden ships that couldn't even float. And they still paid for all of them, even though they didn't float. Ridiculous stuff, guys. Stuff that really shouldn't happen, but especially during wartime, that stuff just gets allowed to happen because the right person is selling you the product. The guy selling you the product has a relationship with someone within the government, more not likely than not. So in total, $52 billion was spent fighting World War One, and of that amount, $39 billion was spent during the war. And that means at least $16 billion of that was just profits from the military contractors and the bankers and such, taking their cut from the goods and monies that they provided. Not too bad. Almost half of the amount of money spent on the war was just profits. Pretty crazy to think. And obviously, like I said earlier, this is something that has never changed and it's only gotten worse. And I think this is a very good argument for the fact that private military contractors should not exist. They are kind of like corporations and billionaires. They're a detriment to society and they're actively harming it. Day by day, they're making things worse. And they want to cloak it in the fact that they help people or create jobs or are pushing new technologies that are going to benefit everyone. But specifically with those technologies, they don't want it to benefit everyone. They want to be able to control people more. That's kind of the end goal of things, because they know that's the one thing they don't have is the numbers. There are far more people, regular people, than them in this world. And the only way they can win is by dividing everybody, putting everybody into little factions, and so everybody fights with each other. I mean, the assassination of Charlie Kirk is a perfect example. That is a whole nother video. But I'm gonna end it there, you guys. This was a pretty short little chapter. All the chapters in this book are pretty short, but I will get started with chapter 2 sometime very soon. Thanks for watching, you guys. Have a good one. Bye bye.